At 11:58 p.m. on New Year's Eve, my father lifted a champagne glass in front of 140 guests and announced that my younger brother, Royce, was about to inherit the company I had spent 12 years keeping alive. The board applauded like it was destiny. My mother smiled like the family had finally been saved. Royce stood beside my father in a perfect tuxedo, accepting a chair he had not earned. I sat 3 tables away, the daughter who had rebuilt the audit system, protected payroll, and helped keep 240 employees from losing their jobs. No one said my name. To them, I was useful. Royce was legacy. Under the white linen tablecloth, my husband Graham covered my hand. On my phone, hidden in my lap, the SEC secure portal was already open. My name is Maren Ellery. I was 36 years old, VP Finance of Ellery Meridian Holdings, and by midnight, I would have to choose between protecting the family lie or finally letting the truth leave my hands. My father thought the countdown belonged to Royce. He thought midnight would make my brother CEO. He had no idea I was one button away from freezing the future he had just promised him. 14 months earlier, I sat at my parents' Thanksgiving table in Charlotte and watched Royce carve a turkey he had not cooked while accepting praise he had not earned. The dining room smelled of rosemary, butter, polished wood, and the kind of money that never needed to explain itself. Celeste had brought out the good china, the one she used whenever she wanted the room to behave. Mira Langford sat beside Royce, laughing softly at every story he told, even the ones I had heard him borrow from other people. Graham sat beside me, quiet as always in rooms where my family treated silence like good manners. Harlan Ellery was 64 then, still broad-shouldered, still sharp-eyed, still capable of making a dinner table feel like a boardroom. He had founded Ellery Meridian Holdings in 1997 from a rented warehouse outside Charlotte, then pushed it through expansion, acquisitions, and finally an IPO in 2016. By Thanksgiving of 2024, Ellery Meridian was a public manufacturing and logistics components company with $420 million in market value, 4 facilities across the Southeast, and 240 employees whose lives depended on decisions made by people who spoke about legacy more than payroll. I knew that payroll better than anyone. I joined Ellery Meridian in 2014 when I was 24 and still young enough to believe hard work introduced itself. I started in finance, learned every broken process, every rushed approval, every vendor file held together by habit instead of controls. By 2020, I had become the youngest VP finance in company history. A year later, when the company nearly cracked under a liquidity crisis, I helped restructure $52 million in short-term debt. There were nights I slept 3 hours, woke before dawn, and drove to the Charlotte headquarters while the sky was still black, because if one wire missed, one vendor panicked, one payroll cycle failed, the damage would not stay inside a spreadsheet. People would lose jobs. Families would lose health insurance. Factories would slow. But at company luncheons, my father called it the year the family pulled together. That was how Harlan erased you. He did not shout over your work. He folded it into the Ellery name, polished it until no fingerprints remained, then handed the shine to Royce. Royce was 32, VP Business Development, and the kind of man people described as charismatic when they meant untested. He had a glass office, a company card, and a calendar filled with trade conferences, steakhouse dinners, and meetings labeled Strategic Partnership Development. His reports were full of phrases like relationship-driven growth and Southeast expansion opportunity. They sounded impressive because they were designed to. My work was quieter: vendor controls, audit systems, payroll documentation, revenue support, SEC reporting backup, the machinery no one praised unless it failed. Maybe it hurt because I had once believed my father and I shared something real. When I was 8, Harlan took me to the first warehouse he ever rented outside Charlotte. The air smelled like cardboard, dust, and diesel. He lifted me onto a metal stool, opened a shipping ledger, and pointed to a column of handwritten figures. "Numbers don't lie if you're patient enough to read them," he told me.
For years, I thought that was our language. I thought if I became good enough at reading the numbers, he would see me, not as the responsible daughter, not as the one who fixed things quietly, as the person who understood what he had built. After dessert that Thanksgiving, Harlan set down his coffee cup. The table went still in that strange way a family does when everyone knows a speech has been rehearsed. Royce will begin as co-CEO in training next spring, my father announced. The full transition will be complete by January 1st, 2026. Mira touched Royce's sleeve. Celeste closed her eyes for half a second, like she had just heard a prayer answered. I kept my voice calm. Have you considered an independent succession review through the board? Harlan looked at me with the patience he saved for people he believed were making a simple thing complicated. This is not a committee decision, Maren. This is family. Celeste reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm, her eyes were not. Don't make this harder than it has to be, she said. Royce did not speak. He did not need to. He leaned back slightly, one corner of his mouth lifting, and I realized the room had chosen him before the announcement ever began.
I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, not because I was weak, because I'd learned what happened when I questioned the family story too early. Concern became jealousy, experience became bitterness, facts became feelings. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The finance floor was dark except for the emergency lights, and the coffee machine clicked through its first cycle while I opened Royce's quarterly vendor report. His division's numbers were too clean. Not good, clean. Too many new consulting contracts landing neatly before the succession announcement. Too much projected growth tied to vague advisory work. Too many descriptions that sounded like they had been written to impress someone who would never ask for deliverables. Then my audit system flagged 3 vendor names: Caldwell Strategic Advisory LLC, Caldwell Supply Partners Inc., Caldwell Meridian Consulting Group. 3 companies, 3 slightly different names, same receiving account, same bank routing, same contract language, same description, Strategic Logistics Advisory, all tied to Royce's division. I checked the vendor review queue again, then the payment history, then the onboarding packet summary. I was not hacking. I was not sneaking through locked files. This was my job: vendor controls, payment authorization, audit support. The quiet machinery my father only noticed when something broke. By the time other employees began arriving, my coffee had gone cold beside my keyboard. That night, I stayed after everyone left. The hallway lights dimmed one by one. The server room hummed behind the wall. On my monitor, the 3 Caldwell names sat in separate rows, pretending not to know each other, all pointing to the same account. I did not feel victorious. I felt cold. Because if I was right, my father had not simply chosen the wrong child to inherit the company. Someone inside Ellery Meridian was moving money through a vendor that barely existed. I printed the internal exception report, saved an offline copy, and placed the folder in my bottom drawer. I did not email Harlan. I did not confront Royce. I turned off the monitor, locked my office, and stood for a moment in the dark, listening to the building breathe around me. That was the first night I understood this was no longer about my father choosing my brother over me. Someone was using my family's company to send money into a shadow, and every line of it led back to Royce. The next morning, I came back before most of the building had woken up and opened the Caldwell onboarding packet. On paper, it was not empty. That was what made it dangerous. Caldwell Strategic Advisory LLC had a W-9, bank information, a Delaware registration out of Dover, and a contract form signed by a consultant named Silas Greer. Caldwell Supply Partners Inc. had almost the same packet. Caldwell Meridian Consulting Group had one too. Different names, same rhythm, same bank, same vague promise of strategic consulting.
I clicked through the files slowly, one screen at a time, because panic makes people sloppy, and I could not afford to be sloppy. There was no real office, just a mailing address. The website was a single page with stock photos of shipping containers and a contact form that led nowhere. No employee footprint, no credible history in logistics, no actual deliverables attached to any invoice, just clean paperwork, enough to pass a surface review if no one asked what the company actually did. And someone had made sure no one asked. Caldwell had been classified as strategic consulting vendor, which meant accounts payable did not need proof of shipment, warehouse receipt, or delivery confirmation. Royce's division had marked it urgent for Southeast Corridor expansion. The packet included an executive override from my father's office. Not a full explanation, just enough authority to make ordinary employees stop questioning it. At 9:17 that morning, an email arrived from Royce's assistant. Royce needs Caldwell cleared before the end of week for expansion reporting. Please advise if finance needs anything else. The words were polite, the pressure was not. I stared at the email longer than I should have, then typed a reply that sounded as boring as possible. Quarterly vendor review is being applied across all consulting vendors under standard finance policy. I will update the queue once review is complete. I read it twice before sending. Calm, neutral. Nothing that sounded like suspicion. 10 minutes later, Royce appeared in my doorway with a paper cup of coffee and a smile that did not belong on his face. "You've been looking awfully hard at my vendor files." I kept my eyes on the report. I look at everyone's vendor files. He stepped inside without being invited. His cologne arrived before he did, sharp and expensive. Maybe that's why Dad thinks you're better with controls than leadership? I closed the folder, slowly enough that he couldn't call it defensive. Leadership usually survives better when the controls are real. His smile thinned. For a second, I saw something behind it. Not guilt exactly, nerves. Then he tapped the doorframe with his knuckles and walked away. By lunch, my stomach felt like it had been tied into a knot. I copied a limited working packet I was allowed to review under finance policy and took it home that evening in a sealed folder inside my work bag. Graham was already at the kitchen table when I came in, his tie loosened, laptop closed, a mug of tea cooling beside him. He read everything without interrupting me. That was how I knew it was bad. Graham argued for a living. Silence from him meant he was building the shape of a problem before he let it speak. Finally, he set the pages down and rubbed one hand over his jaw. "This is not just a family issue, Maren." I sat across from him. "It is vendor irregularity. It might be bad controls. It might be Royce being careless." Graham looked at me, steady and kind, which somehow made it worse. Ellery Meridian is public. If these payments are improper and they affect internal controls or financial reporting, this can become a securities issue, SEC issue, board issue, not Thanksgiving dinner. I looked toward the dark window over the sink. For one foolish second, I still wanted my father to be the man from the old warehouse, the one who believed numbers told the truth. "I can take it to Harlan first." Graham did not answer right away. "If your father is protecting Royce, he'll bury it before anyone outside the family sees it." The words landed softly. That made them harder to dismiss. The next week, Tessa Whitcomb came into my office with payroll reports hugged against her chest. Tessa had worked with me for 6 years, and she could read a spreadsheet faster than most people read headlines. "Payroll needs to clear clean next Friday. South Carolina has 2 overtime adjustments, and one of the warehouse supervisors just closed on a little house near Spartanburg." I nodded, scanning the forms. "And someone in operations asked about the insurance update. Her husband's surgery got moved up." Tessa said it like ordinary office information, but it stayed with me after she left. 240 employees. Not numbers, people, mortgages, surgeries, kids with college forms sitting on kitchen counters. If I mishandled Caldwell, if I turned this into a family explosion instead of a documented case, innocent people could end up paying for choices they never made. That night, after Graham went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights low and opened the SEC whistleblower portal. My hands were steady. I hated that they were steady.
I did not accuse. I did not dramatize. I uploaded records, Caldwell entities, payment patterns, vendor classifications, approval route from Royce's division, the internal exception report, the executive override note from Harlan's office. I wrote only what the documents could support. When the submission went through, a reference number appeared on the screen. I took a screenshot, saved it to an encrypted drive, and placed the small home safe where Graham and I kept passports, insurance papers, and the deed to our house. For a few days, nothing happened. Then Celeste called. "Your father says you've been difficult about Royce's transition." I stood in the laundry room, folding towels because I needed something ordinary in my hands. "I asked for a board review, Mom. Royce needs support, not suspicion. Your father has carried this company for almost 30 years. The family does not need more tension right now." I let the towel fall flat over the dryer. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. There it was again, her softest weapon. I did not tell her about Caldwell. I did not tell her about the portal. I only ended the call politely, then wrote down the date, the time, and what she had said. Not because my mother was part of the file, because I needed to remember how often my silence had been requested and dressed up as love. In March 2025, the SEC Secure Portal showed a new message. An investigator had been assigned. A preliminary review had opened. They requested payment authorization workflows, vendor onboarding records, communication logs, and any evidence of executive-level or board-level awareness. I read that last phrase again. Executive-level awareness. They had enough to look at Royce, but to go further, they needed to know whether someone above him knew. I closed the laptop and sat back. Graham looked up from the other side of the table, and he did not ask what the message said. He saw it on my face. I thought about the executive override. I thought about my father rushing Royce toward the CEO chair. I thought about Harlan's voice at Thanksgiving, calm and final, telling me this was family. For the first time, Caldwell did not feel like Royce's secret. It felt like a door, and I was terrified of who might be standing on the other side. By April 2025, my father had decided the company needed a ceremony before it needed a leader. The town hall was held in the main conference room at headquarters in Charlotte, the one with glass walls, blue carpet, and a long screen mounted above the stage. People from all 4 facilities joined by video. Finance sat near the back because that was where we always ended up, close enough to support the numbers, far enough not to be photographed beside them. The first slide appeared. Leadership Transition 2025. Royce's picture filled the screen. Navy suit, clean smile, arms folded like he had been born knowing where to stand. Harlan walked to the front with a clicker in one hand and the same calm authority he used at Thanksgiving. He spoke about the next generation, about relationships, about vision, about the future of manufacturing and logistics in the Southeast. He talked about the need for a leader who could inspire people, read the market, and carry the Ellery name into new rooms. He did not mention internal controls. He did not mention the debt restructuring. He did not mention the audit systems that had kept us from embarrassing ourselves in front of regulators more than once. He did not mention payroll. Royce took the microphone after him and performed beautifully. That was the word for it, performed. He thanked our father, our mother, the board, the employees, the partners, the clients, and even the regional communities where our facilities operated. His voice was warm, his timing was polished. He knew exactly when to pause so people could clap. He did not say my name. After the town hall, I returned to my office and found Tessa standing near my desk with a stack of payroll adjustments in her arms. She had watched from the back wall, still wearing her reading glasses on top of her head. "He didn't even say your name," she said. I set my notebook down and opened my laptop. "I know what I did. I don't need Royce to list it." Tessa stayed quiet for a moment. "No," she said.
but it would not have killed him. She left the payroll files on my desk and walked out before I could answer. That was Tessa's gift. She never pushed comfort on people who weren't ready to receive it. I told myself I did not need the recognition. Most days that was true. But there is a particular kind of erasure that only happens in public. It is one thing to be unseen in a family dining room. It is another to watch your work become the floor someone else stands on while the room applauds him for being tall. The board made it worse. Some of them had known Harlan since before the company went public in 2016. A few had made money because he took risks they would never have taken themselves. A few owed him favors from old deals, introductions, quiet rescues no one talked about during formal meetings. By the time Royce was presented to them as a relationship builder, the story was already half sold.
I was too operational. That phrase started appearing around me like perfume. Too operational, too numbers-focused, too inside the machinery, not visionary enough. It was a neat way to say I was useful but not desirable. 2 days after the town hall, Royce appeared outside my office again. He lost the tuxedo, but not the smile. You have no idea what it's like being the one Dad expects to carry the name. I looked up from a vendor reconciliation schedule. That almost sounded honest. His jaw tightened. You audit everything because numbers are the only place you feel important. I could have answered. I could have said numbers were the only reason his division looked solvent. I could have asked him why Caldwell needed 3 names and 1 bank account. I could have asked him whether Silas Greer was worth whatever Royce had promised him. Instead, I closed the schedule and reached for another file. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. He laughed once, short and humorless, then left. That afternoon, Harlan called me into his office. The windows behind him looked over Charlotte, clean and bright, the city softened by distance. "We need to streamline review on strategic consulting vendors," he said. I sat across from him with a legal pad on my knees. Consulting vendors are exactly where review matters most. Growth cannot wait for finance to turn every agreement into a crime scene. There it was. Not anger, not accusation, just pressure wrapped in executive language. "Is this about Royce's division?" I asked. "It is about the company moving at the speed the market requires." I wrote the sentence down because it sounded like something that had been rehearsed. A week later, I met Augusta Rains at a small cafe 10 minutes from headquarters. Augusta was 59, a retired CFO with silver hair cut to her jaw, and a way of looking at people that made lies feel wasteful. She had served on our board for 4 years, long enough to understand Harlan and not long enough to be owned by him. I did not tell her about the SEC. I only asked if she had ever seen an agreement that felt wrong but looked clean. Augusta stirred her tea without drinking it. "More than once." "What happened?" She looked out the window where traffic moved slowly under a gray Carolina sky. "Years ago, at another company, I found an agreement that had no business purpose I could identify. I brought it to the board. It was reclassified, softened, buried. By the end, I was the difficult one, not the contract. I watched her hands. They were steady. "What would you have done differently?" I asked. Augusta turned back to me. "I would have finished it." She let the sentence sit between us. "Whatever path you are on, finish it." The quarterly vendor reconciliation began the next Monday. Caldwell was already on the exception list, which meant I had every right to review the original vendor file. No locked doors, no stolen keys, no secret late-night break-in. Just policy, access, and the kind of work people underestimated because it happened in folders instead of boardrooms. The original contract was thinner than it should have been. Royce Ellery had signed on behalf of business development. Silas Greer had countersigned for Caldwell Strategic Advisory LLC. The deliverables were vague: advisory support, market guidance, Southeast Corridor strategy. The payment structure matched the prior quarter almost exactly. Then I saw the routing note. Approved per H.E. Harlan Ellery. I sat very still. The note did not prove he knew everything. It did not prove fraud. It did not prove intent.
but it placed my father's office in the path of Caldwell, and that path was no longer just Royce's. I documented the contract record, the routing note, the vendor packet, and the connection between the three Caldwell entities. I added the second batch through the protected portal. The SEC response came 2 weeks later. The documentation was substantial. They needed communication showing knowledge or direction from senior leadership. Knowledge or direction. The words stayed with me all day. During the next scheduled review, I went to the executive archive. It was a quiet room off the administrative corridor, lined with locked file drawers and labeled boxes. Dorian Pike passed the hallway once, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low voice to Kendall Armitage about board materials. I kept my eyes on the index. Then I saw it. Royce Ellery Vendor Review, Caldwell. The folder sat inside the archive managed by Harlan's office. My hand was already on the drawer when Dorian's footsteps slowed outside the door. I closed it gently, slid the index back into place, and walked out with an ordinary stack of approved files in my arms. No drama, no chase, no one stopping me. Just the heavy knowledge that I had found the place where the answer lived. That night, Graham found me standing in the kitchen with my coat still on. "Are you okay?" he asked. I set my bag on the chair. "I found where the answer is." He studied my face and did not ask the next question. He knew I was not ready to say it. I had not opened the folder yet, but for the first time, I was no longer afraid I would fail to find the truth. I was afraid because I was almost certain it was waiting inside. The next scheduled reconciliation gave me a reason to go back. Caldwell was now on the official exception list, which meant the folder was not a secret door anymore. It was part of my job. Vendor master review, executive approval route, original contract support. The kind of work people called boring until it became evidence. I signed the access log, took the file cart into the archive, and opened the drawer marked Executive Vendor Review. Royce Ellery Vendor Review. Caldwell. The folder was thinner than I expected. That almost made it worse. Big lies do not always come in heavy boxes. Sometimes they fit inside a beige folder with a clean label and a paperclip holding everything together. The first pages were familiar. Vendor summaries, approval sheets, contract references. Then I found the email chain. Royce had written to my father in late summer. "Caldwell Q3 advisory retainer is ready. Silas wants the same structure as Q2. My father answered 4 hours later. "Keep the structure consistent with prior quarters. No need to elevate beyond the current approval path. I'll handle any board-level questions. Make sure finance receives only the standard packet." I read the lines once, then again, then a third time slowly, like if I moved carefully enough, the words might become something else. They did not. Maren Ellery had not just known Caldwell existed, he knew the structure. He knew it should not go beyond the usual approval path. He knew the board might ask questions. He knew finance was not supposed to receive anything beyond the clean version. The room felt smaller around me. I documented everything according to audit protocol. Metadata, file location, date accessed, copy record. No edits, no removed pages. No dramatic moment where I stuffed evidence into my purse and ran like a character in a bad movie. I did the one thing my family had always underestimated. I followed the process. That night, Graham found me sitting at the kitchen table with the scan open on my laptop and both hands flat on the wood. He did not touch the computer. "How bad is it?" I turned the screen toward him. He read the email chain. His face did not change much, but his jaw tightened. After a long silence, I heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted. "If I send this, he is not just my father anymore. He becomes part of the case." Graham sat across from me. The kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the faint sound of traffic beyond the windows. "You are not putting him in the case," he said. "His choices already did that." I looked down at the email again. I thought about the warehouse from my childhood, the ledger, my father's hand tapping the column of numbers. I thought about how proud I had been to understand him. What if this breaks the company? Graham folded his hands on the table. What breaks a company is hiding risk until it becomes a disaster. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say family was different. I wanted to say maybe Harlan had been managing a mistake, not covering one. But the emails sat between us, calm and plain. Graham waited until I looked at him. If that email,
The room felt smaller around me. I documented everything according to audit protocol. Metadata, file location, date accessed, copy record. No edits, no removed pages, no dramatic moment where I stuffed evidence into my purse and ran like a character in a bad movie. I did the one thing my family had always underestimated. I followed the process. That night, Graham found me sitting at the kitchen table with the scan open on my laptop and both hands flat on the wood. He did not touch the computer. "How bad is it?" I turned the screen toward him. He read the email chain. His face did not change much, but his jaw tightened. After a long silence, I heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted. If I send this, he is not just my father anymore. He becomes part of the case. Graham sat across from me. The kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the faint sound of traffic beyond the windows. "You are not putting him in the case," he said. "His choices already did that." I looked down at the email again. I thought about the warehouse from my childhood, the ledger, my father's hand tapping the column of numbers. I thought about how proud I had been to understand him. What if this breaks the company? Graham folded his hands on the table. What breaks a company is hiding risk until it becomes a disaster. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say family was different. I wanted to say maybe Harlan had been managing a mistake, not covering one. But the emails sat between us, calm and plain. Graham waited until I looked at him. If that email had been written by anyone else, would you still report it? I did not answer. I did not have to. 2 nights later, I uploaded the next batch through the protected portal, the email chain between Harlan and Royce, the original Caldwell contract, the routing note, Silas Greer's registration, the Southeastern Logistics Forum record from Atlanta, payment patterns, executive override references. I did not write accusations. I wrote dates. I wrote document names. I wrote where the records lived inside the company system. The SEC response came days later. Evidence substantial. Formal case file being prepared. Preserve all records. Do not alert internal parties outside protected channels. I stared at those words for a long time. A whistleblower tip does not flash across a company dashboard. It does not announce itself in a board meeting. It stays protected. What could reach Ellery Meridian if the case moved forward was something else. A formal inquiry, a preservation notice, a communication through outside counsel. That distinction mattered. It meant the truth could move without my name attached to it. In November 2025, Caldwell came back to my desk, wearing a larger number. Caldwell Strategic Advisory, LLC, 6-month strategic advisory retainer, $940,000. The purchase order required VP Finance sign-off. I remember the cursor blinking beside the approval field. I remember the weight of my pen in my hand, even though the approval itself was digital. I remember thinking touching the file felt like touching something infected. I called Alina Sutter from the small conference room near finance. "If I block it now," I said, "they will know someone is looking." Alina did not soften her voice. "That is possible. Follow company policy, preserve the record, create a concern memo, send the supplemental documentation through the protected channel. Do not improvise." So I did. I signed according to policy. Then I wrote the memo. Vendor requires enhanced review. Deliverables unclear. Executive override present. Potential control issue. It felt like swallowing glass, but I understood the difference between helping a lie and preserving proof of it.
At the end of November, Harlan pushed the board vote through. Royce would become CEO effective January 1st, 2026. Most of the board supported it. Harlan had shaped the story for too long. Royce was the relationship builder. I was too operational. Augusta Rains formally objected, but she was outnumbered. That night, Celeste called. "Your father wants one peaceful night," she said. I was standing in my closet, looking at the black dress I planned to wear to the New Year's Eve gala. "Royce has worked so hard. Whatever you feel, do not bring it into the room." I closed my eyes. Don't make this harder than it has to be. For the first time, those words did not make me feel guilty, they made me tired. Alina called again the week before the gala. She explained the timing one more time. The SEC had been reviewing the record for months, and midnight wouldn't magically create action in minutes. The agency had already been preparing its next formal step based on what it had received. My final supplemental package needed to be submitted before the transition became effective, so the record would be complete before Royce officially took control. If Ellery Meridian received that notice before the transition was finalized, the board had a governance duty to pause.
On New Year's Eve, Royce texted me before Graham and I left the house. "Big night. Try not to audit the champagne." I did not answer. At the Lake Norman estate, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers, white flowers, silver trays, and champagne towers. Kendall Armitage stood near the board table. Dorian Pike moved along the sidewall with his phone in his hand. Augusta sat alone, watching the room like she was reading a balance sheet no one else could see. Harlan adjusted the microphone on stage. Royce stood beside him. Celeste smiled from the front table. I opened the SEC portal beneath the tablecloth and saw the final supplemental package waiting. My father had built an entire room to crown Royce. He did not know the same room was about to hear silence where applause was supposed to be. Harlan stepped to the microphone like the night had been built around his voice. He began with the story everyone in that room already knew because he had told it for years. The rented warehouse outside Charlotte in 1997, the first delivery truck, the first payroll he barely made, the first contract that turned Ellery Meridian into a risk into a company. Then he spoke about Eldon Ellery, his father, and the small business he lost because, in Harlan's telling, there had been no son strong enough to carry it forward. I sat there listening, and for the first time, I heard the flaw in the story, clearly. Eldon had not lost everything because he lacked a son. He lost it because he trusted the wrong people and called that loyalty. Royce stood beside Harlan, chin lifted, champagne glass in hand. Celeste looked radiant. Mira watched Royce like she was already seeing him behind the CEO's desk. The board clapped in the careful way board members clap when the decision has already been made. Harlan smiled out at the room. Beginning January 1st, Royce Ellery will serve as Chief Executive Officer of Ellery Meridian Holdings. The room rose almost as one. I felt Graham's hand close around mine beneath the table. Across the room, Augusta Rains did not stand right away. She looked at me once, then lowered her eyes to her lap. The countdown began a few minutes later. 10. Royce raised his glass toward the board. 8. Celeste turned her head and gave me a small smile, the kind that meant behave. 6. I opened the SEC secure portal under the tablecloth. 5. The final supplemental package was still there, ready. 3. Graham leaned close and asked if I was sure. 2. I looked at my father on stage, the man who taught me that numbers did not lie. 1. I pressed send. Nothing happened at first. That mattered. The chandeliers did not flicker. No one gasped. No one pointed at me. Champagne poured into crystal flutes. The band started playing again. People hugged, laughed, kissed cheeks, and told Royce congratulations like the future had already been signed over to him. I placed my phone face down on my lap and breathed.
I had not pressed send because I hated them. I had done it because the record was complete, because 240 employees deserved a company that was not being hollowed out behind polished speeches, because investors deserved real controls, because truth does not become betrayal just because family asks you to keep it quiet. 11 minutes after midnight, Dorian Pike stepped away from the side wall with his phone pressed to his ear.
I saw the change before anyone else. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes moved towards Kendall Armitage, then towards Harlan. He crossed the room quickly, but not fast enough to cause panic. Kendall met him halfway near the board table. They spoke in low voices. Then Dorian walked to my father and held out the phone. Harlan was still smiling when he took it. The smile stayed for 3 seconds. Then it disappeared. Royce saw it and stopped mid-laugh. Celeste's eyes moved from Harlan to Dorian, then to me. For the first time that night, my mother looked uncertain. The band kept playing for another half-minute before Harlan lifted one hand. The music stopped. The room followed. Harlan returned to the microphone. His face was composed, but his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Due to a late developing governance matter requiring council's review, the leadership transition will be placed on hold. That was all. No explanation, no dramatic confession, no public accusation, just one sentence that drained the warmth from the ballroom. The same guests who had stood for Royce now looked at one another over untouched champagne. A reporter near the back wall began taking notes. Royce stepped toward Harlan and asked what was happening, but Harlan did not answer him. After the guests began leaving, I stood in the hallway near the study. Graham stayed a few feet away, close enough that I knew I was not alone, far enough to let me stand on my own. Harlan came toward me slowly. It was you. I did not look away. I sent what I was legally required and morally unable to hide. His face twisted, not with rage at first, but with disbelief, as if he still expected me to become the daughter who fixed the problem quietly. I was protecting the legacy, Maren. Royce needed time. Caldwell was going to be restructured. I had it under control. You taught me numbers do not lie. Then you asked me to stop reading them. He flinched at that. My father lost everything because there was no son ready to carry it, he said. No, he lost it because he trusted the wrong people and called it loyalty. Celeste appeared behind him, pale and shaking. You destroyed your father. I looked at her, and all the Thanksgivings, all the quiet warnings, all the soft little punishments rose between us. It was already hard, Mom. You just never noticed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her favorite sentence had finally run out of room. Royce came in last. His perfect tuxedo looked suddenly too formal for the man inside him. You always wanted this. You always wanted to prove you were better than me. No, Royce, I wanted you to stop letting Dad protect a lie. Do you have any idea what this does to me? You wanted the title, you signed the contracts, you let Dad protect the lie. That part belongs to you. For once, he had nothing ready. The weeks after that were not clean or easy. The board held an emergency session. Harlan stepped aside pending investigation. Royce was placed on administrative leave, and his badge stopped working the same week his name was supposed to appear on the CEO announcement. Caldwell-related records were placed under legal hold, and the related accounts were frozen through the appropriate legal process. Silas Greer later received a subpoena. A forensic accounting firm came in. Augusta Rains was appointed interim board chair. I was named acting CFO under audit committee oversight. Not as a prize, not as revenge, because the company still had to run and I knew where the wires were buried. When the disclosure became public, Ellery Marine in stock fell nearly 12% over 2 trading days. I did not celebrate. That was not just a number. That was trust being damaged in real time. So I went back to work. We reviewed every consulting vendor. We replaced Caldwell with vetted suppliers. We tightened approval routes. We required actual deliverables.
We documented what should have been documented long before. One Friday, Tessa came into my office with payroll confirmation in her hand. People were scared, then payroll cleared. That was the first sentence that made me feel like I could breathe again. A month later, after the cleanup had begun and Harlan was no longer walking through headquarters like it belonged only to him, a letter arrived at my house. His handwriting was careful. "You were always the backbone. I was too blind to say it." I read it once, then folded it. I did not tear it up. I did not answer it either. A late truth is still a truth, but it does not get to decide when healing begins. That spring, Graham and I planted basil, tomatoes, and herbs behind our house. No ballroom, no applause, no speeches about legacy, just soil under my nails and something honest growing because we cared for it. Celeste called once and told me my father was not well. He can call me when he is ready to tell the truth, not when he needs me to make the family comfortable. The first clean quarterly audit after Caldwell was the quietest victory I ever had. Vendors verified, payments traceable, controls documented, payroll clear. I did not destroy my family. I stopped protecting the lie they had been asking me to carry. If you have ever been the person holding everything together in silence while someone else took the credit, what would you have done in Maren's place? Would you have stayed quiet for the family or pressed send when the truth finally had enough evidence? Tell me in the comments. I read your stories, and sometimes those stories are the reason someone else finally stops carrying a lie alone.